Hey, welcome, dear devotees. My pranams again. We are now live, so we'll begin our session today for Ram Nomi, entitled Kings of Democracy. And before we begin, we'll of course do a small Mangala Charan. And the mood of this session is community development and seeing some value in Varnasrama, which our acharyas have indicated there is, despite Mahaprabhu's sometimes dismissive claims. So whenever we have such community discussions, I personally like to use the invocation prayer that we typically use for Chaitanya Charitamrita, recognizing that ideally when we're creating Vaishnav community, we're trying in our Gaudiya Vaishnav community, that means Mahaprabhu's version of Vaishnav community. So to create an atmosphere where the sweet dealings that happen in the Chaitanya Charitamrita become normalized, and the experience of every devotee is really what our community development efforts are aimed towards. So you all can join me from off mic with that invocation prayer. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, welcome again, everyone on today, and all those who will be watching the recording. Today happens to also be Ram Nomi that we're able to make this presentation, which is, of course, poignant when we're discussing the kings of democracy. Lord Ram being probably the most famous of all the Vedic kings and one of the most prominent incarnations of Sri Krishna. So I'll share my screen now. One latecomer. I'll share my screen now and we can begin the presentation. Is everyone able to see this all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Kings of Democracy, Principles for Accountable Leadership from the Shastra. And the timing of this presentation for me now is poignant because this framing came to me last year. And some of you in the Harmony Collective community in Ypsilanti, you may remember a newsletter I wrote about the Emperor of Democracy, Lord Ram. I happened to be listening to a piece on NPR, and I was hearing these persons who are part of an NGO that go around grading the democratic value of every nation, whether the nation is actually an espoused democracy or not. So China, Brazil, America, Switzerland, they rate the democratic expression of each nation. And I was originally listening from the place of Srila Prabhupada's conviction that democracy is not so valuable, not so good. As a political scientist, I studied that before meeting the devotees. That was my degree in college. I had also concluded that democracy, although on paper looking valuable, in the end, when it's executed, creates a lot of harassment for people. And that was even before reading Srila Prabhupada's narratives and descriptions and his espousing of enlightened monarchy, as Prem described it a few days ago when I was speaking to him about this. So I was listening originally from that place, but as I started to hear the criteria that these NGOs use to grade the democratic value of different nations, I started to recognize that they weren't speaking so much about the administration angle of democracy, i.e. Voting, the politics, so to speak, candidates, voting, elections, etc., what we normally associate with democracy. Of course, those things were an element, but really what those NGOs were rating was a kind of atmosphere that the politics of that country created. And when I was paying attention to what those specific atmospheric elements were, I started to appreciate that our ideal of Vedic monarchy is also intended to bring about the same thing. And so that's the mood of this presentation, is to help us recognize that although most of us are more familiar with appeals to a democratic environment, that's not so foreign actually to the atmosphere that's intended to be created by a Vedic monarchy. And so when looking and having discussions about Varnashram, our recognition and information about what is ideal to bring out is not so far from what's kind of innate and natural to us already. So this is my cute little cartoon that I like to also begin these Varnashram discussions with. We have the Gaura Bhaktas, played by the harassed Tom Hanks, and Varnashram in Kali Yuga, his hobbled together little raft. And some devotees take this cartoon as a kind of chide against Varnashram, but actually it's intended to help us have a positive outlook on the possibility of Varnashram. Those of you not familiar, this is from a film called Castaway. And this haggard looking character, I always think it's funny because he kind of looks like Hiranyakashipu from the 7th canto when he's standing doing his austerities, raising his hands high. So Tom Hanks in the film is stranded on a desert island. And of course, he has to get off that desert island. And how does he wind up doing it? Aboard this raft, which he hobbles together. And in an ideal situation, he wouldn't have a raft. He would have a boat, a ship, a proper vessel to be able to take him from the island to the mainland so he can begin the rest of his normal, healthy life. Unfortunately, he doesn't have such a vessel, but he has an idea of the vessel. He knows the idea of what a boat looks like. And so, and the basic elements of a boat, which are needed to ferry him from the island to the mainland. And that's what he is able to hobble together with this raft. He doesn't have a hull, but he can put together these logs which can float, because it'll need to float, but it'll need to do more than float. It'll also need to be steered. So he makes this crude rudder, and then he's going to be sitting out in the hot sun for possibly days and weeks until he finds land. And so he needs some shelter from the hot sun, and he creates himself a shade structure. So he doesn't have the ideal situation, but he's able to take the principles from the ideal of a boat or a proper ship and then use those principles to construct this crude but effective raft. And this is what I mean by Varnashram in Kali Yuga, that oftentimes we see in devotee communities, there's this kind of romanticized obsession with the details of Varnashram. And we get so caught up in the details of Varnashram that we miss the simple but profound principles that could be implemented today, could be implemented right now to create the kind of shelter that we all feel we need to kind of support our humanity as we move forward on the path of bhakti. So rather than being a chide against Varnashram, this cartoon, this framing of the stranded on a desert island and hobbling together a raft, it's intended to be a hopeful metaphor to help us recognize the need to distill the essence or the principles of Varnashram that we can apply today. So I like to call it Varnashram now, the Varnashram that's possible from this moment, if we're able to discern the principles that a Vedic social system is trying to create the experience of for its citizens. Now we'll get a few quotes from our Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada is saying, the point is that in any society, there must be a leader, there must be directors, and there must be workers. But everyone should be so satisfied that they forget the difference. And this is Srila Prabhupada discussing Karl Marx. So we have Prabhupada standing in the Karl Marx, the famous espouser of communism. Srila Prabhupada spoke against communism often, and here he is standing in the famous St. Petersburg Square in Russia. Another quote, the leader means authority. His instruction is to be followed, and actually it happens. That is leader. Without leader, you cannot become a community or a nation. So I chose these quotes from Srila Prabhupada to emphasize that this presentation is not a glorification of the kind of egalitarian communism / democracy that's become very popular in modernity. In no way does Srila Prabhupada support that idea, nor do I agree with those that do. We value the position of a clear leader, a clear executive, a monarch, as it said. Srila Prabhupada, of course, did. And as followers of Srila Prabhupada, we are obliged to try to do the same. So this presentation, although we're calling it Kings of Democracy, is not getting rid of the king, but recognizing how ideal administrators, ideal monarchs, ideal leaders will create an atmosphere which is the same as, and even better than the one that the democratic framework is attempting to create for its citizens. Again, from Srila Prabhupada, therefore we are training people to be Krishna conscious. And when the Krishna conscious people will elect Krishna conscious leaders, there will be peace and prosperity. This is one of many quotes where Srila Prabhupada, in different ways, gives a nod to the potential of democracy when it's executed by those with God-conscious principles. And we'll see later on, after we go through a series of narratives, we'll see how in some practical ways Prabhupada also intended to implement this democratic, even some of the administrative elements of democracy into his ISKCON society. So there's a kind of harmony that's indicated in this quote. Prabhupada also has a famous exchange with Tamal Krishna Maharaj, where he says the same, that because the people of your land are sensitive to this democratic ideal, so you should be also. I'm paraphrasing Srila Prabhupada, that things have to be done according to time, place, and circumstance. And because democracy is the kind of momentum of the day, we can't avoid that. We can't dismiss that in the name of some kind of objective ideal. So Srila Prabhupada saw even some value in the administrative element of democracy. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are these NGOs that go around benevolently telling everybody else how good or bad they are. And they do that on the basis of how well countries are creating a democratic atmosphere for their people. And when I was listening to this synthesis from these NGOs, I came to appreciate that they weren't so much talking about the administration of democracy, but again, the atmosphere that's created for the citizens themselves. And so in doing a little more research into the criteria for those different NGOs, I simplified. Some people say there's 9, some people say there's 15 kind of hallmarks of democracy. I synthesized it down to these 6. Citizen participation, equality, political tolerance, accountability, transparency, and control of the abuse of power. And this list is going to be important for us to come back to. In fact, if somebody could right now put in the chat these 6, that way I don't have to come back to this slide each time. What we're going to do now is move through 6 pastimes from the Shastra, mostly the Bhagavatam, and we're going to ask ourselves how much, if at all, the behavior of the kings in these different pastimes bring about or indicate these ideals that are heralded by democracy. So again, citizen participation, that means how much the citizens participate in their own governance. Equality means each citizen has their rights respected and maintained, and those rights are offered equally, offered without prejudice. Political tolerance, how much other parties who are against you or not of your same ilk are accepted, allowed, and facilitated. Accountability for the leadership, transparency in the leadership's dealings, and control of the abuse of power. When someone does something wrong, especially someone in a position of power or privilege, what happens to them? what is done about it. We have a few things in the chat. Let me just check that. Okay, thank you, Adari Leela's posting those. Oh, Lokabandhu, nice screenshot there. So let's keep those there in the chat, and we'll refer back to them. What's going to happen is, at the end of each narration, I'll then ask you all to vote on each one of these qualities or principles of democracy by turning your camera on or off. So we'll say, did this pastime indicate the value of citizen participation? And then if you had a yes response to that, if you felt the pastime does indicate that, you say your yes simply by turning your camera on. And if you feel that it didn't, you keep your camera off. So actually the best thing is for everybody to go camera off when we're doing our voting session. And like that, we'll go down the list. Turning your camera on or off is the simplest way to give a yes or no. The raising hand feature is a little cumbersome here in Zoom. So we'll get into these narrations now. And again, at the end of each one, that will be when we're looking for your participation. We'll also have a little moment for reflection or comment if anybody has anything they'd like to bring out. Again, thank you all for being here today. So, of course, it's Ram Nomi. We want to start with the pastimes of Sri Ram. Sri Ram and the Shudra. Prem, are you of a position to be able to read aloud for us?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Cool, thank you.
Okay. And I begin.
Yes.
Lord Ramchandra subsequently dressed himself like an ordinary person and began wandering within the capital to understand what impression the citizens had of him. By chance, one night, he heard a man talking to his wife who had gone to another man's house. In the course of rebuking his wife, the man spoke suspiciously of the character of Sita Devi. The Lord immediately returned home, and fearing such rumors, he superficially decided to give up Sita Devi's company. Srila Prabhupada, Srimad Bhagavatam 9:11 summary.
Thank you, Prem Prabhu. So this is one of the most well-known and heart-rending moments in the Ramayana, where Lord Ram goes out dressed as a common citizen for the purpose of hearing from the citizens in an anonymous way, and therefore obviously in a kind of straightforward way. What is their opinion of him? What is their experience of living in his kingdom? And he's listening with the intent of imbibing that feedback. We can understand that because when he hears even a Shudra say in a very kind of offhanded way about his wife being out some evening in an inappropriate way and then coming home, the Shudra remarks, "Who do you think I am, Ram? And you can behave like Sita and leave my home in this inappropriate way." As soon as Lord Ram hears that, he goes back to his palace and takes this very dramatic, drastic action of sending Sita Devi to Valmiki's ashram. Sometimes it's misspoken that he banished Sita Devi, but Valmiki's ashram was still within the jurisdiction of his kingdom. So he didn't give up one principle of protecting a woman. He made sure that Sita Devi was still within his protection, but he removed her from the kind of public view, recognizing that at least one, and therefore maybe other of his citizens had this concern about her character and the integrity of their relationship based on Ravana having taken her, Sita Devi having spent time in the home of another man. So now it's time for casting your vote, dear devotees. Please turn all cameras off, and we'll go through these bullets, the 6 here on the side with the chat, and we'll see if any of these principles of democracy are brought out by Lord Ram's choice to go out into his kingdom anonymously and dressed in disguise to hear the opinion of his citizens about how well he's running his kingdom. And then his response upon hearing these grumblings of a Shudra about the integrity of Sita Devi. And I'll also turn my camera off to participate as well. So citizen participation. Equality. Political tolerance. Accountability. You can leave yours on if it's going to roll. Transparency. Control of the abuse of power. Okay. Does anyone have any reflections or comments they'd like to make on this particular pastime, or any one of the principles which you felt were particularly highlighted by this pastime? Yeah, Nanda.
Well, some of them, I mean, I don't know if I feel it was kind of unclear watching everyone with their cameras on or off if what all the answers were. But I know for myself, it wasn't a yes on necessarily all of them. It felt as though this is just a side point maybe, but it didn't feel like Sita got a fair shake in that whole situation. So if that's the quality that we're concerning, it doesn't seem like such equality in that sense.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting point. There's an idea, to whom much is given, much is expected, and the Caesar's wife must be beyond reproach. So when within the democratic ideal as well, when one takes a position of leadership, then it's understood that you also take on a burden of responsibility that's beyond the common citizen. And so in that way, the equality that you extend to your citizens is not the same as the character to which, or the kind of deference that a citizen may get is not the same kind of deference that one in a leadership position receives. They're held to a higher level of scrutiny, even within democratic situations. Any other reflections, comments? Daria.
As far as citizen participation, in hearing the story, there is a level of citizen participation, but something that's, I guess, uncomfortable for me is that it's just like kind of in a gossip way. It's not an actual avenue of constructive communication. So I find it interesting, like, to take that as feedback, to take that as like real feedback, like walking around and just hearing like almost like the rantings of the people. So yeah, it's just interesting and a little bit uncomfortable to me that would be like feedback.
Yeah, there's a saying that character is what you do when no one else is watching. So Lord Ram chose to take his feedback anonymously and go hear the kind of honest rantings, as you're saying, of the citizens. Okay, so we'll move on. Prem, you had one.
Oh, I just quickly wanted to say this seems to take this particular Leela, the notion of political tolerance just to the nth degree. It's not just being tolerant of, let's just consider it an opposition view of this person, but it's taking it so seriously as to change one's own whatever political preference to accommodate the other side or party.
Yeah, the other view. Yeah, of course, Sita, there's a reason and a cause for the whole situation, which was in most people's eyes, obvious and acceptable. But because there was even the slightest concern, the slightest bit of doubt came into some of the hearts of his citizenry, Lord Ram could understand. Prabhupada gives the example of the grain of rice, and you don't have to check each grain to see if it's cooked, you just pinch one. So seeing that one person had this concern, Lord Ram could understand that others were also having such a concern, and that potential lapse in the apparent integrity of the kingdom is unacceptable by a proper kshatriya, one who's following in the footsteps of Lord Ram. Okay, devotees, so we'll go on to our next pastime. Thank you for right away participating so avidly. And to be clear, it's not that each one of the pastimes is going to indicate all the principles. It's just a question of if one or a few of the principles is being indicated, and in what kind of way. So I appreciate the lively discussion as well. Premji, you available for reading again? We'll keep you as our
Sure, yeah.
dedicated narrator.
Shibi and the pigeon. The hunter bird refused to accept the king's offer, but it was settled later on that the eagle would accept flesh from the body of the king of the pigeon's equivalent weight. The king began to cut flesh from his body to weigh in the balance equivalent to the weight of the pigeon, but the mystic pigeon always remained heavier. 1.12.20 per.
Another famous pastime. Maharaj Shibi is mentioned several times in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada describes the pastime in brief here, that a pigeon came taking shelter of Maharaj Shibi, saying, I'm about to be eaten by this eagle. And so Maharaj Shibi defended the pigeon, gave him shelter, but then the eagle said, well, what about me? I'm also one of your citizens and I need to eat. So then Maharaj Shibi eventually came to volunteer his own flesh. He said, I will give myself as much as the pigeon weighs, that much flesh that you would have gotten from eating the pigeon, you can take from my own body. And as Maharaj Shibi began to cut his flesh and weigh it in balance of the pigeon, somehow or other, no amount of flesh that he was giving was enough to tip the scale in weight of the pigeon. And that didn't deter Maharaj Shibi, although somehow he had cut off huge chunks of himself and still it didn't seem to weigh as much as a pigeon. He was unrelenting in his willingness to give of himself up to the point that he was ready to die. And at that point, both the pigeon and the eagle revealed themselves to be devatas who had come to challenge and also highlight the benevolence of Maharaj Shibi and his willingness to extend protection to his citizenry to an extreme degree at the cost of his own well-being. So I've gotten a sly note, turn on screen share during the voting. Aha, okay, that way gallery view. Good call, Davey. So I'll share my screen now and go back to our gallery view for the voting. So going back to our chat. Uh-oh. Okay, I'll not be able to turn my camera on and off and vote with you all, but let's
Your
now
screen share is still on.
Yeah, my screen, I need that so that everybody can see the gallery view for the recording. So now you all, actually, Prem, if you can just walk people through, because I can't see the 6 principles of democracy there in the chat, and walk people through turning their cameras on and off for them, that'd be helpful.
Okay. Citizen participation. Equality. Political tolerance. Accountability. Transparency. Control of the abuse of power.
Thank you, Prem. Okay. A lot of camera action on that one. Anybody have any reflections or comments they'd like to share about Maharaj Shibi and his behavior? Okay, we'll move on. Our next pastime. Yudhisthira takes blessings. Go ahead, Prem.
Disregarding their jeers, Yudhishthir went before Bhishma, who got down from his own chariot as Yudhishthir approached. The Pandava bowed down and took hold of Bhishma's feet. "O invincible one, I bow down to you," he said. "We will fight with you. Please grant us your permission and give us your blessings." Bhishma smiled and raised his right hand. "O ruler of the earth, O great king, if you had not come to me in this way, I would have cursed you with defeat. I am pleased with you, dear son. May you fight and obtain victory." Krishna Dharma Mahabharata 2.5.
This is one of my personal favorite moments in the whole of the Mahabharata. This comes after Arjun has heard the Bhagavad Gita from Krishna and is redoubled in his commitment to fighting. And then to everyone's astonishment, Yudhishthir takes off his helmet. Yudhishthir takes off his armor. He lays down his weapons and he begins to walk over to the side of the Kauravas. And everybody at this point is stunned and thinking that Yudhishthir is now getting cold feet and he's somehow going to back out, try to make some accord with the Kauravas so that this war doesn't have to happen. And Yudhishthir, completely disarmed, walks over to grandfather Bhishma, Dronacharya, the senior members of the Kaurava dynasty, and he touches their feet. And he asks for their blessings, that he will be successful in fighting them. And grandfather Bhishma says this remarkable thing: "If you had not come to me in this way, I would have cursed you. But because you've come to me, I now bless you to obtain victory. I bless you to defeat me in this battle because you've come to me in this way, acknowledging the etiquette, acknowledging the relationship. I now bless you to defeat me, to defeat us in this battle." So we'll go to our voting panel. And Prem, I'm depending on you even more than I expected. If you could read off for us.
Likewise, sure.
The 6 principles of democracy and see what of them are represented in this move by Yudhishthir of approaching the Kauravas and asking to receive blessings from the seniors before engaging with them in battle.
The first, citizen participation. Second, equality. Third, political tolerance. Fourth, accountability. Fifth, transparency. And finally, control of the abuse of power.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll take any reflections or comments. Personally, the political tolerance demonstrated in this pastime is so profound. The kind of vitriol that we see, discussions playing out even within our own devotee community, and the stark contrast to Yudhishthir's respectfulness while still maintaining integrity to his own convictions, the kind of respect and deference that he gives to the other side is just profound here. Does anyone else have any reflections or comments they'd like to share in that?
It's also so transparent. It's mind-bogglingly transparent.
Yeah. Excellent point. Yeah, instead of intrigue and backbiting and pretending and sleight of hand and all this trickery, which has become so common in any political sphere, he's literally baring his heart. He's just baring his naked chest to the warriors of the world and admitting what he intends to do in an incredibly potent demonstration of transparency. Adarya Leela.
I was thinking that it's transparent in their interaction, but also his army had no idea what he was doing. So it was transparent in that direction, but not necessarily to the greater public. They were kind of like, what's going on here?
Yeah, interesting. Right. Everyone else was a little confused until they saw what he was doing. Other reflections? Okay.
Also, I want to say that when, by following this culture of offering, going to a senior, it helps to avoid the abuse of power later on, because he's taking a humble position before the senior. So there will be no abuse of power.
Yeah, it kind of hand in hand with that mood of transparency and being straightforward in one's dealings. Then you're not abusing whatever particular position you may be in, taking advantage of it either as the junior or the senior. Nice point. Yeah, Grandfather Bhishma's own deference, his own straightforwardness also. Thank you, devotees. We'll move on to our next pastime. Arjuna steps forward. Go ahead, Premji.
Thus, Arjuna indicated that Kshatriyas should not sit back comfortably on the pretext of performing Vedic rituals, but must rather be very chivalrous in protecting the citizens. Brahmanas, being engaged in spiritual activities, are not expected to do anything which requires physical endeavor. Therefore, they need to be protected by the Kshatriyas so that they will not be disturbed in the execution of their higher occupational duties. Krishna Book, chapter 89.
So this narration from our Srila Prabhupada is coming during the pastime of Arjuna trying to placate the distressed Brahmana. And this distressed Brahmana was found by Arjuna standing on the doorstep of Maharaj Ugrasen's palace. Maharaj Ugrasen was the king, a family member of Krishna, coming from an illustrious and well-respected dynasty. But this Brahmana was standing there holding in his arms the body of his dead child and screaming insults, Vedic insults, but insults nonetheless, screaming insults over the walls of Maharaj Ugrasen's palace, calling him a corrupt leader, a worthless excuse of a Kshatriya, asking him, what has he done to violate religious principle, which has caused so much inauspiciousness to come to his community? Because now I, a well-respected and dutiful Brahmana, have watched countless of my own children die. And no father, what to speak of a father like myself, who's doing such high duties for society, no father should have to watch his child die. No father should have to hold in his arms the body of his own child. And yet here I am standing on your palace doorstep, Maharaj Ugrasen. The Brahmana was indignant, and Arjuna saw this, and his immediate response was, "O Brahmana, I see you have lost faith in the Kshatriya race. If I can't restore that faith in the Kshatriya race, I'll kill myself." And the pastime, of course, carries forward, and we find out that it was Vishnu all along who was removing the souls of this Brahmana's children to induce Krishna and Arjuna to come visit him. So it had a different pretext, but the character of Arjuna stepping forward is what we want to look at now, and in relationship to these 6 principles of democracy. When Arjuna sees the Brahmana standing on the doorstep of Maharaj Ugrasen's palace, indignantly hurling insults at the whole race of Kshatriyas, and particularly the ones represented by Maharaj Ugrasen, how does Arjuna respond? And what principles, if any, of democracy does his response indicate? So I'm able now, I'm understanding the tech side of things. Vrindavani is informing me, so I can read off the principles here myself. Firstly, citizen participation. Does this pastime indicate citizen participation? equality, political tolerance, accountability, transparency, and control of the abuse of power. A lot of cameras moving on and off. Anyone has any reflections or comments on this particular pastime? Yeah, Lokabandhu.
The principle of accountability, although, on one side, the Brahmana himself, being, taking the aspect of lack of accountability, if he contributed to anything of his son's death, but immediately was posing that it's because of the authorities that this happened. But on the other end, Arjuna takes this up as a serious indication that something is inauspicious is happening in the kingdom. So he stands up for the Kshatriya race.
Yeah, rather than turning it back on the Brahmana, essentially, and saying, well, surely you have done something wrong to deserve this. It's your karma. As some people who have experienced difficulties in our ISKCON society have been told, well, it's your karma. It's not the fault of the leaders or the GBC, whatever. Rather, it's your own karma that's caused this suffering for you. That wasn't Arjuna's response. Oh, you're a Brahmana. You should know the Shastra that nothing can happen to you without the will of God. No. Arjuna's immediate response was to take responsibility to the ultimate. If I can't create an atmosphere for you where this doesn't happen, then I'll give up my own life. So thank you, Lokabandhu. Yuga Dharma.
Yeah, just echoing kind of what you said, that tremendous responsibility, because sometimes, you hear how opulent the kings were. They're just, it sounds like maybe they're just sitting in their palace enjoying or collecting taxes, but just the fact that, a person could show up in a large city. We understand that Prabhupada says that, there was millions and millions of people there. It wasn't like a small village. So just one Brahmana could show up and say, this is unacceptable, and that there's a response to it, and not just like, well, apply through the proper channels or something. So that's like another thing that stood out to me, is the responsiveness of the governance there, which also controls that abuse of power. Like there's no kind of hiding behind bureaucracy in this.
Talk to my secretary.
He just kind of comes and he just kind of yells it, right? He just yells it at the wall. He doesn't have to submit some kind of paperwork or go through a council of Brahmanas, because they could have had like, hey, I have like a, show up once a week and submit your petition. But he just came, he said something, and there was an immediate response. They didn't ignore him or say like, well, are you even
follow procedure?
Brahmana? Yeah, like, are you even like, let's examine your character. Like, are you a proper Brahmana or something? Right? So just that responsiveness and that tremendous responsibility that you potentially have millions of Brahmanas living in your city. And if any one of them gets upset, then yeah, you're responsible. You can't just hang out in your palace and enjoy, this tremendous amount of opulence that you have. So that stood out to me.
Yeah, well said. Excellent point. Okay, we'll move on to our next pastime. Thank you, devotees, for your kind participation. Go ahead, Premji.
Priyavrata and his chariot. To stop the quarreling among different peoples, Maharaj Priyavrata marked boundaries at rivers and at the edges of mountains and forests, so that no one would trespass upon another's property. Srimad Bhagavatam 5.1.40.
The reluctant leader is often the best leader. And so Maharaj Priyavrata was asked ultimately by the father of his guru to take over essentially the post of Manu. Otherwise, Priyavrata was hoping to just follow in the instruction of Srila Narad Muni, who was his spiritual master, and remain in bhajan his whole life. But Lord Brahma personally came and said, take over the position of your father. So Priyavrata, among the many wonderful things he did, one of the things he's credited for is by the driving of his chariot wheel, carving out the different jurisdictions of Bhumandala, the larger celestial earth plane. And in giving those different jurisdictions, it was acknowledged that each group of citizens had their particular space, their place to live peacefully and in the way that they wanted to, recognizing that in a kind of homogenized soup, not everybody is able to live peacefully and happily. Giving everybody their piece of land, their tract of space to live as they would like, actually creates an atmosphere of protection for everyone. So going to our 6 principles of democracy, does Maharaj's Priyavrata's behavior indicate any of these 6? Citizen participation, equality, political tolerance, accountability, transparency, control of the abuse of power. Any reflections or comments on Maharaj Priyavrata's behavior, their relationship to these 6 principles of democracy? We had a lot of cameras coming on and off. And personally, the discussion about integration, and we have Srila Prabhupada describing unity and diversity, and that's a maxim for our ISKCON community. And seeing how within unity and diversity, there's a natural tendency for different groups to spend time, birds of a feather flocking together, as Srila Prabhupada also said. And in the name of unity, sometimes the need for people to have their own space, different groups to be allowed to live out what's comfortable for them sociologically, is denied or dismissed or not well understood or provided for by the leadership, in the name of trying to create this look that everybody is unified and doing the same thing, going in the same direction. And there's a way in which, by allowing people to live out their differences without harassment, then when it's meaningful and it matters, they'll come together. So oftentimes at temples, you can see this when the arati is going on. Everybody comes into the temple room and is chanting Hare Krishna and dancing for the pleasure of the Lord. And then when the curtains close and it's prasadam time, everybody breaks out into their cliques. And the different groups will be with the different groups, and you can see it kind of stratify naturally across the rest of the temple property. Everybody will be in their little clusters of comfort. Everyone was coming together when it was time to do that highest and most sacred thing, coming to worship the Lord, chanting his holy name. And when the curtains close and the holy name stops and it's time to sit and take some prasad and sit down and eat, then the stratification happens. And if you tried to artificially stop that, then you'd have a problem. It's a natural situation. And to allow for that is a hallmark of good leadership. So Maharaj Priyavrata showing us that. Any other reflections or comments? Okay. We'll move on to our, I believe, final pastime.
Sri Ram and the dog. On hearing Sri Ram's speech, the wise Lakshmana, after hurriedly calling the dog, informed Sri Ram about its, the dog's, arrival, and presented him before Sri Ram. Having seen the dog that had come, Sri Ram said to him, "O dog, tell me what you have to say. You need not fear at all." Valmiki's Ramayana, Uttarakhand.
So we began with Sri Ram, and today is Ram Navami, so we would like to end with a pastime of Lord Ramchandra. And this one begins with Lakshman being sent by Lord Ram to the palace gate. And Lord Ram said to Lakshman, "Go and see if any person is calling on me, if any person is requesting audience with me." And so Lakshman goes to the palace gate and finds one dog standing there. And Lakshman says, "O great citizen of Ayodhya," he speaks very sweetly to him, "O great citizen of Ayodhya, is there any business which you have come to the palace for today?" And the dog says, "Yes, I request audience with Lord Ram." And Lakshman says, "Very good. Please come. Lord Ram is waiting for you." And the dog actually says, "No, I'm unwilling to enter until you go to Lord Ram and confirm that he is comfortable with a dog coming into his palace." Because there's worship taking place. There are temples within the palace walls, and my presence there may be a disturbance. So please, Lakshman, you first go and request Lord Ram, ask of Lord Ram if he's comfortable with me coming into the palace. And so then Lakshman very dutifully goes back, and Ram sees Lakshman and says, "Oh, Lakshman, tell me, has anyone come?" And "Yes, my lord, there's a dog who would like to have your audience. May he come in?" And Lord Ram says, "Yes, of course, please send him." So then Lakshman goes back. Lakshman is just being the messenger here. Lakshman returns to the dog at the front gate and says, "Please, our Lord is waiting for you." So the dog enters the palace. And Lord Ram looks sweetly at the dog and says, "My dear citizen, what has brought you to me today?" And then the dog says, "My lord, although I was without cause or blame, while standing in the street one day, I was struck by one of your citizens. In fact, a Brahmana, a sadhu. That sadhu struck me on the head with his cane. And now I have this wound on my head." So immediately, Lord Ram sent a minister to fetch the sadhu whose name had been brought by the dog. And the sadhu came in front of Lord Ram with the dog present, and the story was told. The accusation was levied against him. And very quickly, the sadhu said, "Yes, my lord, the time for begging, the time for Madhukari had ended, and I had not received all that I had hoped for that day. And so I became angry. And in my anger, I lashed out at this dog in the street, and I struck him." So the Brahmana was forthcoming that he had indeed hit the dog. And then the question of punishment came. And Lord Ram's ministers were all discussing for a moment amongst themselves, and then shared a problem with Lord Ram, which was that because of the injunctions of religious Shastra, capital punishment cannot be administered to a Brahmana. You essentially, you can't punish this person for doing this wrong thing that they have done. And then the dog spoke up, and he said, "My lord, if you will allow me, I may suggest something." And Lord Ram said, "Yes, please." He said, "If you will please offer to this man as punishment a position as the Kulapati of one of your temples." Kulapati means basically like temple president. "Let him become the temple president. Let him become the GBC of one of your main temples here in the kingdom of Ayodhya." And Lord Ram said, "Yes, may it be so." I think the Kunjari temple, I'm forgetting now the name of the particular temple, but it was a very prominent mutt within Ayodhya Dham. So Lord Ram said, "Yes, let it be so." And the ministers were all a little taken aback, and they immediately said, "My lord, it seems that you have not offered him a punishment, but a reward. This is a boon, to be given a position of power and authority and opportunity." And then Lord Ram indicated to the dog and said, "May he explain why he's spoken in this way." And then the dog spoke up and he said, "I myself had been Kulapati of this same ashram in my previous life. And although I had behaved according to religious principle and done my service diligently, still the high profile nature of that role and service is such that I had made mistakes and offenses, and had now had to take this position here. So this person who is so reckless and irresponsible in his present position and is kind of indignant in his willingness to act out will quickly be adjusted in the high profile atmosphere of Kulapati, the high profile service of being a Kulapati. So then the ministers were shocked by the sagacity of this dog, that this apparent benediction, which was being given to the perpetrator, was actually a punishment, and very quickly he would be brought to account, because in that atmosphere he wouldn't be able to behave so recklessly very long. So this is the conclusion of our narrations of the different anecdotes of notable Vedic kings, and we'll see now with a vote of cameras if any of these 6 principles of democracy are evinced by Lord Ram's dealings with the dog who came to call upon him. So we'll begin with citizen participation. Equality. Political tolerance. Accountability. Transparency. And control of the abuse of power. Okay, thank you, dear devotees. Any reflections or comments on this pastime of Sri Ram and the dog?
The implications of this pastime for our current moment seem very interesting. Current moment in ISKCON, that is. But it also strikes me that it seemed, or at least I would hope, that the ministers and Lord Ram and the dog considered the very particular nature of the sadhu that was brought to justice in this situation, and not just for any person in any place at any time. Yeah.
Yes, it was very tailored, wasn't it? And I'm struck by how the dog was allowed to participate in not only offering his concern, but also then the judgment, the adjudication of the whole situation. The dog was also involved in that. Very meaningful. And the spectrum of society that's represented, you have a dog who lives in the street, and you have a brahmana, and they're being brought to court, essentially, and the deference, the kind of equal treatment that the two receive. Vrindavani.
I'm struck thinking about how much you have to count on leadership being held accountable to want to put such a person in a position of more power in order to learn a lesson, because thinking about doing that today seems like, well, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. That's exactly the person you don't want to put in such a position. But how much society would have been structured that leadership is held to such a high level of accountability that they wouldn't have concern for him being able to abuse his power.
He's not going to get away with it.
Quite struck by how different that is from the way we think now.
Right. And we see that kind of cronyism where people who are malicious are then put in positions of power to be allowed to continue to be malicious, covered by the cloak of their position. So yes, a very radically different atmosphere to the one we're used to, where it's not that an abusive person is being put in power so they can continue to abuse, but so that their abuse will be very clearly seen by all and very quickly corrected, because there's a whole culture of accountability in the community of Ayodhya. A beautiful point, Vrindavani. Thank you. Yuga Dharma.
I thought it was interesting that the punishment was really kind of on a higher level, because I was thinking if someone said, I hit a dog because I was hungry, could have just been like, well, why don't we just feed you more? Like, why don't you just come to our house and we'll just give you this food? But the idea was that the punishment, as it were, was to promote the Brahmana further in the spiritual life, right? Like, you have this issue And therefore, instead of just doing some kind of surface level adjustment of like, well, let's just open like a food bank near your house and you don't have to hit dogs anymore. It's like, well, here's the deal. Now you're going to have to get purified by becoming the Kulapati.
Well said. Yeah, the punishment was tailored for the well-being ultimately of that particular individual, not a kind of blanket boilerplate punishment given to everybody as punitive, but really it's ultimately meant to uplift. Great point. Okay, devotees, we have a few more things we'd like to share, particularly around our Srila Prabhupada's desires for his ISKCON community in relation to the principles that we've been discussing. Thank you all for your kind participation. So Srila Prabhupada's Direction of Management is an important document where Srila Prabhupada establishes the GBC and their purpose and the general tenor of the society's management going forward. It was written in 1970, and Prabhupada saw to it that many of the temples after 1970 were incorporated under these documents all the way up to 1975, as one devotee was sharing with me, his own knowledge of specific temples that had been incorporated under the Direction of Management. So although some have pointed out that Srila Prabhupada didn't implement the things in the Direction of Management in specifics, we could also recognize that that may not have been because Prabhupada didn't see value in them, but because he didn't see the opportunity to do so yet. His society hadn't matured to the place where he would be able to, but the aspiration for the society to function in this way was clear from Srila Prabhupada's own statements here. So I just took a few of the bullet points from that Direction of Management to highlight in principled and also administrative ways how Srila Prabhupada wanted to incorporate these democratic values into his ISKCON society. So this is the second 2, 3, and then 8 bullet points, or points within the Direction of Management, of which there's about 17. His Divine Grace will select the initial 12 members of the GBC. In the succeeding years, the GBC will be elected by a vote of all temple presidents, who will vote for 8 from a ballot of all temple presidents. So actually the temple presidents are the automatic nominees of the GBC, and then amongst themselves, the temple presidents will vote who amongst us will be the GBC, which may also include any secretary who is in charge of a temple. Third point within the Direction of Management, the commissioners will serve for a period of 3 years, and they may be re-elected at the end of this period. So the accountability that comes with term limits, a renewal of people's commitment to their GBC, that every 3 years or so, the GBC's position is up for question, and they either are removed or reestablished every 3 years. And then point 8 that Prabhupada brought out, removal of a temple president by the GBC requires support by the local temple members. So should a GBC try to come in and remove any particular temple president, that would have to be in accord with the desires of the local temple congregation, which is a way of saying that the local temple congregation has a say in who their temple president is. There should be some consideration made to the desires of the local citizens of ISKCON, rather than just the top level of leadership or hierarchy making all of the decisions separate from that. So these are considerations for communities that we would like to offer anybody watching this presentation and wanting to see more of these and recognizing that bringing in more of these so-called democratic ideals really means bringing in Vedic ideals into our ISKCON community. And how might we go about doing that? So one kind of mantra that I picked up in Mayapur, having several conversations with devotees from different places across the world who were intrigued by this idea, but feeling a little daunted by the task of bringing it into their locality. I recognize that everybody across ISKCON who's concerned with the condition of the society and across the Gaudiya community, it's not that the problems of ISKCON are unique to ISKCON. That's one of ISKCON's problems is that we think that the problems are unique. They're not special. They're not unique. These things are going on, as Prabhupada would say. and the solutions to them are universal as well. So those who have concerns for their spiritual community, wherever you may be, we all need to upgrade our approach. Upgrade your approach from personal grievances to principled requests. We've all been in a situation where we felt slighted by some authority. But if we keep the conversation in that position of the personal attack against me, then we don't really elevate the conversation to a place where things become actionable for the society and where change can be made. Whereas if we recognize the principle of our own particular difficulty that we've faced and what thing needs to be changed systemically in order to prevent such situations from happening to people in the future, then we're speaking from an elevated place. We're speaking from a powerful, impactful place. And so I've offered 3 kind of bullet points here, 3 questions that every person in every ISKCON community needs to be able to answer for us as a society to have a healthy body. Number 1, how do you establish, renew, and remove your local leadership? If you don't know how to get rid of your temple president, then you don't really have a temple president you can trust. And it doesn't mean that you don't have a good temple president right now, but without that transparency and accountability, it's very difficult for everyday people to give their lives to a movement, to a community, to an organization. And so we see that in our ISKCON communities, people have a very distant relationship with the overall social body now. They may come to the programs, they may give a little money, but in terms of the all-out investment that we see, the kind of hallmark of the early days, there's very little sense of investment from the common citizenry today. And that's not necessarily because they're all distracted and in Maya, but I would say it's at least as much because there's not clear, accountable, transparent dynamics in the leadership. And so when one makes such an investment, it's likely that your investment in good faith is going to be dismissed and disregarded at some point, and there's going to be no process for protecting it. So which goes to our second point. What forms do you have for community expression? If your community doesn't have regular ishtagostis and regular forums like Lord Ram was making opportunity for the dog to come make his complaint, if your community doesn't have regular forums for citizen expression, then you have to create those. Otherwise, what you get is gossip. There's going to be problems and complaints of all kinds, no matter how well things are going. Even Lord Ram, somebody could find fault with Sita, so what to speak of ourselves? There's always going to be issues and concerns and complaints. What forums have been created for those complaints and issues to be addressed in a healthy way? If a leader is not being proactive in creating those forums, then all they're doing is inculcating a culture of gossip in their communities. And that gossip, that gramya is toxic. Having concerns and complaints is not toxic. Again, we didn't see Arjuna gaslighting the Brahmana standing on the porch of Maharaj Ugrasena. We didn't see the dog being told that he's just a dog and what does he expect standing in the street? People are going to hit him sometimes. So it's not that gossip or complaints, or rather complaints or concerns are bad or wrong. Actually, that your citizens feel comfortable coming to you with them is a sign of their trust. And then how does the leader respond? And one of the ways to show that the leader deserves the deference and trust of its citizens is by creating these forums where such things can be expressed. And the third, are there clear protocols for adjudication and punishment in cases of disputes or abuse? So when something comes up, somebody has done something wrong, how is that handled? Is it handled in a structured way, in an objective way, in a way where there's protocols, or is it handled in the kind of mafia style that we often see things done, where it's a consideration of who's your guru, how long have you been around, how much money do you give, which service do you do, and based on these criteria, then we decide if we are willing to punish you or not. And if you're somebody insignificant by those measurements, then we throw the book at you. And if you're somebody who is too big to fail, then no matter what you've done, we make sure that you're protected, and we kind of sweep under the rug whatever issues you may be having. So these are 3 questions that every devotee in any ISKCON community ought to be able to answer. How do we establish or renew our local leadership? What forums do I have for community expression? And are there clear protocols for adjudication and punishment in cases of disputes or abuse? So in our own community, small as it may be in ISKCON Ypsilanti, Michigan, USA, we've tried to answer some of these questions. And the irony in Ypsilanti in our experience so far has been that the devotees are a little apprehensive to engage in these kind of democratic processes, in some ways because there's not a felt need yet. We're still a young community, relatively small, and the relational dynamic is still quite organic. We only have 40 or so committed members. And so things get worked out in interpersonal dealings in most cases. And when I started to implement these more structured changes, establishing things that I'll describe in more detail in a moment, when we started to implement them, people got worried that it was just me creating this kind of pretext where I can resign. They thought I was quitting, and I was trying to create this kind of flowery way of doing it. But that wasn't my intention. I recognized that as small as we may be, for the future, we need to set up these infrastructures so that people can trust the decisions that are coming and not just see them or think them to be the iterations of their one charismatic leader, in this case, myself. So the first thing we did was set up a cabinet and a council, the CC. As I mentioned earlier, our meditation is to try to create the community dynamics of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And so we call our CC our cabinet and our council. The cabinet is the executive body, the group of devotees who make decisions. So I'm the head of the cabinet as the community director. And then I appoint my own cabinet. I pick my Sankirtan leader, I pick my treasurer, I pick my head pujari, the people that I trust to take on the executing the services that need be done. And then I depute to them, I defer to them a certain level of decision-making autonomy within the sphere that they have been given responsibility of. So our head pujari doesn't have to call me about everything in relationship to the service of Gaura. I trust him to make decisions, and anything big or consequential, he knows to come to me and we have a discussion. The council is something chosen by the congregation, the devotees, and the council is nominated and sits in on all of the cabinet meetings. And the purpose of the council is a few. The council sits in and listens to the deliberations that we're having over the different decisions as a cabinet, and they give their feedback. One, their own understanding, their own vision, but also that which they may have heard or concerns they may know that the general congregation has. Second thing the council does is act as a receptacle for concerns, complaints, suggestions coming from the community. Because one thing I've recognized is that not everybody is comfortable speaking to authority. So although I may make myself available and say that I would like devotees to come to me with their concerns and problems, some devotees may not be comfortable doing that for various reasons. So the council acts as a kind of buffer, a safe space, so to speak, where people can come and air their grievances in a way that they, without feeling intimidated. And then the council is responsible to come and bring those to the cabinet to be discussed and addressed as appropriate. And then this administratively within the council is able to veto if the cabinet is making some decision that the council isn't comfortable with. Then the council can veto, and then that puts things into a limbo, and the cabinet can then decide to push back and put it to a vote to the community or not. We've never come to that. I don't see us coming to that anytime soon within our community, but that kind of dynamic is there within the cabinet and council. Two, we have Ishtagostis and a proposal and complaint form on our service hub online. So we have a kind of internal website for the devotees where they can see the event calendar. They can make concerns, comments, questions, complaints. And then we have regular semi-annual community meetings, Ishtagostis, where we come together and discuss the vision of the community and remind each other of our dedicated participation. And then at present, I'm developing a constitution, which kind of lays out how these things are established, how a cabinet member is established, how a council member is established, what are the protocols for making decisions and the processes for renewal and responsibility that we just mentioned. So simplicity is said to be Vaishnavism, and it is also good governance. We have a picture here of our dear Bhaktivinoda Thakur sitting with his family. We hear about all the children he had, so here they are, and his wonderful wife. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur was not only a wonderful Vaishnavacharya, but he was also recognized by the British Raj as an excellent judge. He could move through a caseload in moments that took people weeks and months to deal with, because he just knew that the right time to do the right thing is right now. And he was ready to make the honorable, accountable decision based on good governance, which is not magic or mystical, but very obvious if one is ready to take on the responsibility of running it. So the hope of today's presentation was to help those of us who grew up in a more democratic atmosphere, which is all of us because of the way the world has gone, to recognize that the sensitivities we have and the sense of how society is intended to be experienced is not so foreign to the Vedic ideal, but in fact, in terms of experience for citizens, is very much in harmony and in line with what is meant to be brought out by the administration of Varnasrama. So I'll stop there, dear devotees. Thank you for your kind attention, and I'll just see if there's any closing reflections or comments that anybody has, or by chance a question. And we'll look to end by 9:30, keeping things at a nice round 90 minutes.
I just wanted to appreciate your attempt and your effort here, Madhava Prabhu. I really liked how you took anecdotes and passages from our Shastra, which were very sort of at a wide and large scale, and you sort of narrowed it down, brought it down to the vision of your community, which is really where each of us have some influence. And so I really liked how we could go from Ram Raja to Ypsilanti, Michigan. And that, I think, tends to give us some sense of agency and hope in how to affect a beautiful CC type communities in our own sanghas. Thank you.
Thank you, Premji. I appreciate the encouragement. Yeah, again, with our small community, 40 people, in some ways, these things feel fussy and bureaucratic to try to implement right now. And it's been a little slow, and it's like stopped and started, stopped and started. As a political scientist, I have a passion for it. So I'm trying to drive it. But if you're in a community of 400 devotees or 4,000 plus, as are there in some places across the world, and these things aren't there, then it's just a recipe for disaster. I don't understand how it's possible to create an atmosphere of love and trust without these clear demarcations of transparency and accountability for the leadership. So devotees who are concerned about their own experience in their own place, wherever it may be, upgrade your request and start to speak from these principled places, and recognize that the Shastra empowers you to do so. The Shastra requires you to do so, to ask this of our ISKCON leadership, that we need these atmospheres if we actually want to create the Krishna conscious communities that we know Srila Prabhupada expected us to manifest. Adarya Leela.
Piggybacking off of that a little bit, if one were to be in a community where they didn't feel like there was an avenue to make requests, but they're hearing this and thinking, yeah, this sounds really great. I would love to be part of a community that implemented something like this. What would your advice be, or what avenue would you take in that situation?
Srila Prabhupada's preaching, education, advocacy, propaganda. You have to teach your felt, because you're not the only person who's feeling that pinch. If you're in an atmosphere where these things aren't in place, there's all kinds of discontent, and to channel that into a productive expression is the real challenge, so that it's not appearing as gossip and criticism, but is really principled concern about a lack of Vaishnav community, a lack of Varnashram dynamics, because there's a lack of democratic experience, transparency, accountability, citizen participation. So start to educate your fellow devotees. If you have a relationship with the leadership where you can bring it to them, great, but it's doubtful. So start to educate your fellow devotees. And this was part of the mood of making this video, is that there would be a kind of conversation starter if anybody wanted to share amongst their communities and substantiate the value of these conversations. That's what I was trying to do here today with you all. So that's why I appreciate very much your participation. But start educating and showing devotees, proving to them that these things are not far-fetched, egalitarian, leftist ideas. These are the ideals of Lord Ram. These are the ideals of Priyavrata. These are the ideals of Arjuna. Arjuna saw the Brahmana standing with a dead child in his arms and said, I will die before you have to experience that suffering again. Where are our leaders standing up in that mood of Arjuna? Where are our leaders standing up in that mood of accountability that Ram shows to a dog, what to speak of a fellow devotee? So to empower through education, like our Srila Prabhupada did, that's what every devotee is able to do. And the critical mass that will develop, as Vrindavani beautifully brought out in Ayodhya, well, it seems irresponsible to send the angry Brahmana to go be Kulapati, but he's not going to be able to act out for long, because there's a whole community of educated citizens who know how the temple president's supposed to behave. So when he doesn't behave that way, he's going to get adjusted quick. So to educate our fellow devotees in the real qualities and characteristics of a Vedic community and Vedic leadership is the most effective long-term way to change the present culture if it's dissatisfying on some level. Other reflections or comments? Thank you, Adarya. Okay, devotees, again, I appreciate your kind attention. And please forgive me if we misspoke something or spoke something that was upsetting in any way. We're glad to have this opportunity to try to manifest Srila Prabhupada's vision of Vaishnav community. And we know that it's his desire, so we can trust in his empowerment if we approach it in a faithful mood. So we tried to make that presentation to this presentation today in that way. And we look forward to being able to serve with you all again in whatever capacity Krishna allows sooner than later. Shri Ram ki jai. Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the